Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm here with Olly Bryant, or Olly Bryant. Hi Ollie.
Hi guys.
Can you tell the audience who you are and what you do?
I'm Olly Bryant and I race GT sports cars, modern and historic, and have done for many years now.
Have you done that how did you get into cars and racing and that sort of thing?
Well, it's in the blood really. My dad used to race quite a lot in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and then he stopped, sort of late 80s in the recession, have kids and as people do. And then he got back into it a bit during the 90s. He raced Daytona 24-hour and Sebring 12-hour.
Oh, nice.
Did some racing in the US, which was really cool.
What sort of things was he racing in?
American stuff. So one year he raced a stock car, literally like a NASCAR that they just converted and put some lights on it, and it did Daytona. And then the other year was a car that you may have seen actually in Endurance Racing Legends, which is the Cannibal, Chevy Cannibal. It's
yes.
Yeah, with the roof cut off, and you probably saw it at Paul Ricard last year.
It's like half a car. It just doesn't even look like a real car.
Yeah, actually it was the only open top world sports car at the time. So it's a cool thing. So yeah, he raced that. So I grew up with him sort of away doing that sort of stuff. And then I got into racing when I was 16. We bought an MGB, and I started in the MG Car Club sort of historic series. James Cottingham, he was doing it as well at the same time. We started together in that first year, and then Rob Huff was doing it as well, although he was in a different class. And then he obviously went on to his touring car career straight after. So it was a great learning craft, because you've got a low power car with skinny historic tires, and you've got to learn how to drive it properly. And as you move up through the ranks, you're driving stuff with more power and more grip. So you just have to adapt. But it's a great way to learn.
Were they quite reliable at the time, the MGBs?
They were. I mean, ours were sort of the FIA spec cars. So they were all to the historic spec with historic engine and correct ignition systems exactly as they were in the day. So you had to keep on top of them. But no, they were pretty good really, and incredibly good around the corners. I mean, very different to a road MGB, I'd have thought, in terms of how they were set up and the power they delivered. And, a bit like, if you race a historic 911 like I do, a race prepared one of those versus a road car. Yeah, they're both great things, but they're totally different in terms of how tight they are and how set up they are for the track. So I know it was great and a fantastic way to start with really close competitive racing. And, but I'm glad I've done bigger races and longer distance stuff since then, because, I remember we did a race one year at Cadwell Park, and 15-minute race, and the faster class cars, which were MG GTV8s, on big fat slicks. So they'd lap us 3 times. So we'd be up in Cadwell Park for a whole weekend for sort of 11 minutes of running. And then, of course, you've taken 3 days out of your life to go and do it. And so I'm glad now that I'm doing races which are, bigger events and longer races. You get a lot more seat time. But no, it's a great way to start, and, met some good friends and contacts along the way.
Yeah. So you've sort of throughout time, you've done a bit of racing and then a lot of racing. At what point in time did it start to become a job?
Well, I started obviously when I started in the MG, it was just, I was at school at the time, and I was doing that championship, and I managed my headmaster was actually a fan. He actually had an MGB, which was quite useful. So I managed to negotiate the ability to park in the staff car park with my Citroen C5 estate car with my MGB on the back. So when lectures were finished, I could, when class was finished, I could, drive off to Donington or Snetterton or wherever, and not have to go home and load up first. So, I was doing that, just for fun, and started to share some of my dad's cars, like the Morgan Plus 8 and the Cobra, obviously, in that sort of era. And then, I got into GT racing. 2004 was my first GT race, in a contemporary car at the time.
What was that?
And that was actually it was in Bahrain. It was the GT festival, and it was in a Diablo. So I basically went from an MGB to a Diablo, which was
nice,
which was quite a step up. First time on slicks, first time obviously on a modern F1 circuit. And I actually shared with Christophe Boucher, who's quite a famous professional French driver. He won Le Mans with Peugeot. He's a really experienced guy.
Yeah.
And he was my teammate, and it came about because his regular teammate that weekend got ill. Basically, he was under the weather, and I'd gone out there with my license and helmet in the hope that I'd be able to get a drive in something. And it was looking pretty non-promising sort of come Thursday evening. And of course their weekends, as you know, they finish on the Saturday. So everything happens a day earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I met the guy got ill, and I definitely had nothing to do with it. But I took his seat basically and drove the Lambo, and we came sixth in the final. It was GT2 at the time, so
Yeah.
it was a really cool experience. And then Keith Arlers, who's a sort of quite well known historic racer, has got lots of big Morgan collection. He was racing there in his Aero 8 Morgan with Aaron Scott, who's a quick driver who's done Le Mans and GT racing for a long time as well. And Keith was looking for a teammate for the following year. So he saw how I went in the Lambo, and then I basically got to drive with him in 2005 and 2006 in British GT,
was
fantastic.
In a Morgan?
Yeah, in the Aero 8, effectively a GT3 Aero 8 back then.
It's so funny when you seeing the Morgans versus the other cars. They just look hilarious. They just don't look like proper cars for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, they're a very quirky thing, the Aero 8. I mean, the chassis is actually quite advanced on them. It's proper, sort of boxed aluminium chassis, all resin glued together, with sort of the orange glue oozing out of all the seams like you'd see on an Aston or Vantage or something. And, the BMW V8 and, it had an X-Track gearbox, and, it was a quick car. We had several class wins in 05, and we came third in the championship in 05 and 06 with it, which was really good, given we had a transit van and a sort of trailer with a side awning, and we were against sort of Ferrari and Porsche trucks. And so that was great, learning in that environment and sort of being in the underdogs against some of those big manufacturers. So
was it quite difficult running the cars? You had quite a small team then of people?
Yeah, very small. Yeah. I mean, Keith, he had a great guy called Billy Bellinger who sort of grew up around the older Morgans, and then he was sort of handed the task of running this, at the time, modern GT car. And it was modern, albeit it still looks like a Morgan. It's quite old school. It's cross-eyed at the front. The headlights kind of squint at each other. But it's it was a good car, and the whole of GT3 formula at that time was all based on power to weight. So the idea was that your 996 Porsche was 12 or 1300 kilos and had 380 horsepower. We had less power than that. We probably had 330, 340, but we were lighter than them. And then you had the 360 GT3 car, which was basically a challenge car with a wing and a front splitter. And it was in the early days of GT3, which has obviously gone on to be, basically like a worldwide formula for GT racing. But no, it literally was Billy Bellinger and his dad who helped us out. So it was the two guys plus myself and Keith. So obviously, unlike most drivers, between sessions we were helping take the car apart and clean up the wheels, and it was a great grounding and way to get into that GT world, and race against some great drivers who I've gone on to race against throughout GT racing and over the years, which is really cool.
Have you had any hilarious repairs? Obviously, having stuff damaged is annoying, but things you've had to do to get a car back on track.
Back then, I mean, the reason we did so well in that series was the Morgan was pretty reliable, and Billy did a great job with it. We had a couple of annoying things that happened during testing, like the diff broke once, so it locked the rear wheels up at Donington, so we had to go and rescue it, and you couldn't tow it back, so we had to put it up on jacks, that sort of stuff. But there wasn't anything with the Morgan really that springs to mind. I mean, I've raced a lot of old cars over the years, so they've obviously had their fair share of reliability issues, but no, fortunately nothing too drastic when it comes to things like that. So
during this time you've been racing some modern GT cars. Have you carried on? Do you still race GT cars occasionally? Yeah,
the last couple of seasons I haven't raced anything modern. I did the last modern race I did Silverstone 24 Hour at the beginning of 2018. Yeah, which is when they ran it. I think it was the February or March date, which I don't think they'll repeat because the weather was just so grim. It was a lot of darkness and pretty difficult with the stoppage in the night because of fog and things. That was in just a little 235i, the BMW.
Yeah.
In that sort of touring class, the cup class, and that was good. Did it with some friends, the guys I'd coached previously. Yeah. And my dad joined us as well on that, and it was a good crowd. And we came second in class. We had a wheel bearing issue that cost us half an hour or something, but I do love the endurance stuff. And then prior to that, my big modern race before that was I did Le Mans 24 Hour in 2017 with Beachton AMR. So in the GTE AM class, and we finished fourth, which is a mega result. I mean, we were actually battling for second, so fourth was a bit of pill for us at the end. We had an issue with one cylinder towards the end of the race, so for the last 4 hours of the race we had a misfire, which was gutting at the time because we were swapping positions all race long with the 488s that came first, second, and third in the end. Yeah, and we just slipped off off the podium, and we finished 76 seconds behind third after 24 hours. So that was close.
How does
incredible race
racing, like a Le Mans 24 hour versus a normal endurance 6 hour, 3 hour, 2 hour compare, or other 24 hour races?
I mean, the event itself is like nothing else in terms of the size of it, the scale of it, the number of people that are there, the amount of time you're there as well. I mean, you're obviously there 2 weeks earlier for the test, which is their other opportunity to shut the town down and go through the 2 test days, which happens on the Sunday and Monday, normally the last weekend of May. But then when you get to the event yourself, you're there for, again, you get there on the Saturday and you don't leave till the following Monday. So it's a serious, you're there down there for 9-10 days again. And just the scale of the whole thing with the number of spectators and the number of manufacturers and the campsites, it is incredible. I've not done Nürburgring 24 hour. I've done Spa 24 hour 3 times, Silverstone 24 hour many times, and then other classic 24 hour races. But no, it is an incredible event, and something I'd love to do again. I've done it twice now, 2016 in a Corvette, and then 2017 in the Aston. And I would love to go back. I wanted to go a lot sooner. When after my first full year's GT racing, back in 2005, as a 19-year-old, I was like, it's all about Le Mans. I've got to be there next year. And I was there every year with friends and going down there and camping. And then so many of my, sort of counterparts that I was racing with or against ended up doing it. And when you're going there and not racing, it just becomes so frustrating that you say to yourself, look, I'm not going to go back now until I'm behind the wheel. And the only times I've been back is when I've been either racing in the Legend Support race or Classic Le Mans, and actually had a chance to drive. But to go as a punter for me now, having done it, would be quite a hard pill to swallow, really, until I'm of sort of retirement age, and then I'll happily go back.
Not ready to hang up your hat yet.
No, definitely not. So no, definitely unfinished business there, and an honour to do it, and great teams I was with both years, and to finish twice, that in itself is a big achievement. I was a bit disgruntled when you're close to a good result and you don't get it. And then, chatting to Sam Hancock, who obviously a fantastic driver and does a lot of commentary now at Le Mans, he's done the thing, I think 4 or 5, maybe even 6 times in, LMP1 with the Aston and LMP2 and Porsches. And he's never had a finish. And then when you suddenly realise that, all the opportunities you can have to do well at that race. But nowadays, to be fair, the cars are a lot more reliable. So the chance of finishing is a lot higher.
But don't they also just, because they're so reliable now, people drive flat out the whole time? Yeah,
it is. Yeah, it is flat out. It is literally a sprint. You think twice about a silly move that in a sprint race you'd probably give it a go. And with curbs and things, you're a bit more cautious. But your general attitude to risk is the same as in any race. You are, in terms of pace, you are flat out. Now, the risk element, I suppose, is the only element you do alter slightly. And you can't get fueling wrong there. At Le Mans, if you miss your in-lap, they run them so tight on strategy to eke out the number of stints that, if you miss your in, you won't make it round. But not at a sensible pace. You could wind the map right down and creep round, but the time you'd lose is huge. So no, it is fantastic. Whereas, when I used to go and watch in sort of, 2004, 2005 in LMP2, for example, back then, if you finished, you were on the podium. I mean, simple as that, so you just, if you were if it was a year where the engines were a bit fickle, you would just drive to finish and you get on the podium. So it's definitely changed since that, and the quality of the drivers now, and the amateur drivers that, generally speaking, fund most of these GT AM cars. They take it so seriously at that level, and they go through all the right training and have several years building up to it. Used to get people that would do a year's GT racing and then they'd buy a car and get a team to run it for them at Le Mans. That doesn't happen now. Most of these people have won championships or had a huge amount of experience themselves before they go and undertake that race, because the costs are just so crazy in terms of tyres, fuel, insurance, number of personnel.
What is the cost of a GT? Like, let's say Spa 24 and then, or Silverstone 24, and then compare that to Le Mans. Are they significantly
everything.
Different?
Obviously, the cars are different.
Crazy.
Your GTE at Le Mans, whereas GT3 is the top class at Spa and Nürburgring, for example. GT3 cars are generally a lot more cost effective. In the last few years, I've not driven one or raced one for a full season since 2015, and they were already pretty big numbers then. But allegedly, they've gone up even more. But no, to give you an example, I mean, I think nowadays it's somewhere between probably 250 and 300,000 euros to run a GT3 car at Spa 24 Hour.
Okay.
It was sort of 160 when we were doing it in the Z4 back in 2015. But yeah, I believe now in GTE, to run a GTE car at sort of factory level, it's like €1 million to run the car for one event. And that doesn't include buying it or buying any equipment. So that's just the costs of doing the event. How much is a GTE car? Your insurance.
600-700?
How much are they?
Yeah.
I think they're more than that now. I think that used to be the sort of figure. But I hear now that current GTE car, be it Ferrari, I think it's probably the most expensive. They're sort of, I think, €1.5 million now with all the bits you need, with all the endurance packs and the wheels and all the special stuff you need for Le Mans. So yeah, it is huge numbers. But what you're getting nowadays, which, especially with the success of, the sort of historic modern series that are coming out, such as the one that runs with Peter Auto that Jarrah organises, and the Masters one, is you're getting people that are appreciating these modern GT cars now, and you're getting a lot of people who are forward purchasing GT cars. So you actually have a position now where you could say, I'm going to go and run, an ELMS or a WEC program to include Le Mans over the next 3 or 4 years. Would you fund the car? So would you, the invoice from Ferrari will come to you. It'll be your car from day one. We'll agree to lease it from you. We'll run it for that 3 or 4 years. We'll put it back to as new spec at the end, and you'll get a car that's hopefully done X, Y, and Z.
Done Le Mans and whatever.
And if you happen to get the car that's the Le Mans winner, then actually fast forward 20 years, you've probably done all right. But it's a bit of a brave shout in the current world.
It is. And especially with the prices of these cars, it's just madness. And then you compare, let's say, because LMP2 must cost pretty much the same as GTE.
Yeah, I think LMP2 was obviously traditionally a lot more cost effective than LMP1, because that was the sort of marching ground of the manufacturers, with where budget really wasn't a problem. It's obviously becoming more of a problem now, sort of certainly publicly. But LMP2, I think, used to be fairly cost effective. It depended entirely on sort of the chassis and the engine package you had. Touch wood, over the last few years, certainly they've been incredibly reliable, these LMP2 cars nowadays. But I'd say in terms of, they're probably similar cost-wise. GT and LMP2 is probably fairly similar.
But how much quicker is an LMP2 than a GTE car? Quite a bit, isn't it?
Now, probably 15, 20 seconds around Le Mans, I'd say. Maybe a little bit more. I mean, the GT cars now are dipping into the 40s. So they're doing sort of, I guess it'd be, 348, maybe 347, something like that now. And an LMP2 car is probably in the 30s now, low 30s.
Yeah.
And the P1s are now, the hybrid cars are below 320 now. I mean, 320s used to be an insane time around Le Mans. And I think, was it a couple of years ago, Kobayashi did that lap, it was 314 or something?
Yeah.
In that perfect conditions that day. And it was just an amazing lap. But, it is incredible to see those things. And it'll be sad when they stop running, because they are the absolute pinnacle of technology.
Yeah, they are. What do you think? What would you like to see going forward at, let's say, WC, GTE?
No, I think it's quite important to keep that link to the road car. That's why I love GT cars. I mean, I wouldn't turn down a drive at Le Mans in a prototype. It's not something I've got experience with. There's a lot more aero, and you'd need to go and sort of, to get prepared for that, you'd probably need to go and get a radical and do, a season's radical racing, really, to be fully trusting in the extra grip you've got. It's easy for the guys that come from single seaters, because they just step into it and they're going down in downforce rather than up, like I would be. But I think GT car would be my preference, just because you've got that synergy with the road cars, and going to Le Mans over the years as a spectator and seeing, the RSRs and the Ferraris and the Corvettes and the Astons racing. Those have always been the great battles. Multi-class racing, is incredible to see, but the GT battles are always incredible. You watch Le Mans nowadays, and hopefully we'll all be tuning in for real in September for the race this year. But when you see 10 GT cars, line astern, all the different makes, nose to tail for 24 hours, with all the different sort of performance characteristics coming out, some being quicker on the straights and some better in the turns, it's a cool thing to see.
It's definitely, if I'm watching that sort of race, it's the GT cars that I appreciate the crazy fast stuff just for what they are. But to see the Porsche line up with the Ferrari and all this stuff, that's what gets you going. But I think that I heard the other day, it was, I don't know whether it was real or not. It was trying to get rid of or merge GT3 and GTE into one class.
I've heard something about that in the past. I mean, difficulty with that is GT3 isn't built to a set of regulations as such. The manufacturer puts their car forward and then balance of performance adjusts the cars accordingly. So if Aston come out with a car with a particularly big engine that's really fast, they will then, the balance of performance, or BOP as it's nicknamed, they will adjust things accordingly. So they'll give the car an engine restrictor or some extra weight or a ride height penalty to kind of balance the cars out. And that generally does work very well in GT3. The same thing does apply in GTE, but the GTE rules are stricter, and you have to build the car to a much stricter set of regulations, I think, in terms of relation to the road car and also the engine spec. And as a result, they're a more finely tuned, highly stressed vehicle. Basically, they've got a lot more air. They've got a lot more mechanical grip in a GTE car, whereas GT3, is a bit more basic. The floor isn't quite as sophisticated. They've got huge, aero anyway. They've got massive wings and large diffusers and things. But so they're higher aero, less mechanical grip.
Is that the main difference when you drive? If you drive a GTE car versus a GT3 car?
The main difference to get used to is there's no ABS in a GTE car.
Okay.
And although that doesn't sound like that big a deal, obviously all the historic cars I race, none of them have got ABS. But when you go from a GT3 car, where I've had 10 years of driving GT3 cars most weekends, and you basically have to hit the brake pedal as hard as you can, and you'll get into the ABS, and then you can adjust accordingly. But you basically don't have to fear locking up. You can sort of, which is why they're so AM friendly. For bringing the bronze or gentleman drivers along with you, they, if you tell them brake there and sort of aim somewhere near the apex, it will work and the car will get there. If you try that in a GTE car, you'll just lock up and you'll be straight off. So taking the step back from GT3 up, I suppose, to GTE, but also back in terms of technology to GTE, was a big shock for me when I jumped in the Corvette, because it felt like a GT3 car, with the paddle shift gearbox, and I felt the brake pedal felt the same initially on the initial hit, but then the car just filled up with smoke. So I knew, hang on, must have locked up here. And of course, this is on your outlap at LeMans, and you don't want to get anything wrong. So that took a bit of adjusting, and then you really have to train your brain that you can have that massive initial hit on the pedal, but you have to then bleed out of the pressure so quickly, otherwise you will lock up. They do all have locking lights now, which is moved into things like Carrera Cup, but there's also no ABS on the 991, and in that again you've got locking lights, and you actually know which corner of the car it is as well, because you can't always feel it through power steering and things. So you can come out the pressure or straighten your steering wheel to just kind of put that wheel back on the ground, so that's helpful. But that's probably the biggest difference I'd say between GT3 and GTE is the lack of ABS on a GTE car and more mechanical grip. So in the slower speed corners, you've got a lot more grip on a GTE car than you have on GT3.
Yeah, they're just badass. I love GTE cars. I think. Yeah. I wish they had a bit more horsepower though.
Yeah, well, they're just obviously,
from a spectator point of view.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously, I think because they are quite slippery, the GTE cars, because they're, a lot of the seasons do focus around Le Mans. They've got very efficient aero, and they're very, very good at high speed. I think if they allow them to have 650 horsepower like a GT3 car does, they'd be too fast for the LMP2s and the LMP3s, the LMP1s that are trying to come past them. So, they're still quick. They're still a quicker car over a lap than a GT3 car, but there's not much in it. They are very, very close. When you think of the cost difference between them, it probably takes a lot of persuading for a guy racing GT3 to make the switch, because he's going to think, I'm spending double the money and I'm not going
like
quicker.
2 seconds faster.
Yeah.
Have you seen that series? What is it? It's another SRO one with the GT2 cars. Oh,
okay.
It was like the GT2 RS.
Yeah, I saw something linked about it. I saw a couple of them. I saw Audi Festival of Speed last year. There was an Audi one there that I saw, and I don't know if that's a new. Is that a sprint series? I'm not exactly sure.
I think it's a sprint series, and with the idea of being GT3 pace, but not GT3 aero. So more horsepower, less aero.
That'd be interesting.
To make it easier for drivers to just, you've got overtake on the straights, less into the corners, that sort of situation.
That could be. They've got to be a bit careful. At the end of the day, you've got the same number of sort of jet drivers out there that are buying these cars and owning these cars, and spending the limited time they have away from work to race these things. So you've got to be a bit careful. You don't dilute the number of things they can do.
Well, yeah.
There's so many series nowadays, in modern and historic motorsport that, that's some of the issues you're getting now. You've only got so many weekends in a year, and people's time is divided up quite preciously, and they're being pulled in all sorts of directions. They've got to make sure there's not too many grids.
A big grid. Yeah, exactly. You just want a big full grid of one thing rather than like 5 differents. So whilst you've been doing all this modern GT car racing, you've done a lot of historic racing. Yeah,
I have. I mean, as I said, initially my roots, I suppose, were in historic, starting with the MG, and then sort of alongside the GT racing I was doing, I was racing. My dad's got an old +8 Morgan that he used to race in the 70s and 80s. At the time, there was a series called Heritage Grand Touring Cars that was televised, and it actually followed British Touring Cars and British GT as a support race. So it was quite good when I was racing the Aero 8 with Keith, that my dad would be there anyway to support me, and we'd have the Morgan with us. And of course, I'd race in the support race as well. So awesome. I was getting a lot of seat time, a lot of track time, basically, which over the years has massively helped. The fact that I've been in things a lot, so I sort of it always keeps me fairly sharp, which is good. At the end of the day, you're driving to the limit of the grip the car's got, whether it's on slicks with huge wings or on a tiny historic crossply. You're driving to the limit of the grip. Like when you put someone in a go-kart, you soon find the limit when you see them backwards in the gravel.
Yeah.
So you just drive to the limit you've got. So it doesn't really matter what speed you're doing. It's a weird way of describing it, but that is kind of how it's like. They're all fundamentally the same.
Yeah.
It's an efficient way of getting them around the lap. That's the quickest way possible. So you just apply the same kind of technique to everything, really. Yeah.
When I'm watching I've seen different people do different styles of laps. Let's say in the 2 litre series, which you've been racing in for ages, you've posted quite a lot of videos, and it's normally like a pole lap with Ollie, hooning his 2 litre around. Hopefully, fingers crossed. But generally, I would say you look pretty smooth most of the time. I would say it's like from just watching, and then you could compare this, and you could see someone going pretty fast, but like all over the shop in terms of slip angles.
Yeah.
In the 2 litre cars, I guess different cars you can allow different types, but is there one way? Is smooth just faster, always faster, or where's there's definitely a balance
in a car like the 2 litre? The Porsches, we're on an Avon, which is actually quite a good tyre. So you've got quite a lot of grip. If you go really sideways, the car's not actually got that much power. They're under 200 horsepower and they're over 1,000 kilos. I think 1040 is the minimum weight. So the power to weight, it's fairly decent. They're pretty swift, but there is a limit basically. If you get too out of shape, you basically haven't got the power to deal with it. You'll be massively sideways, sort of on the lock stops. And at the end of the day, when you hit the loud pedal, you've only got a certain amount of shove, so it's not going to necessarily correct you. And you've done a much longer line around that corner. You're all crossed up, all out of shape, scrubbing speed off effectively. And that was something I learned when I started in the MGB. When you don't have much power, 150 horsepower in a MGB and the car's pretty heavy, you've got to sort of be as smooth as you can. And that was where I learned to try and be smooth. I mean, there are people that drive the 911s totally different to me, and they just back the thing in everywhere and just full throttle before the apex, completely sideways. And I'd say over a lap, there's probably not much in it, but you try and do that for 90 minutes without your pace dropping off, and it's just not possible. I mean, Pascal Pandelaar, who's Dutch driver that's really, really quick in those Porsches that I've seen racing for years. Yeah. I mean, there's some great onboards of him over the years, sort of backing cars in at Eau Rouge, and really, really cool, amazing to watch, very flamboyant, and he's quick. And to be fair, he's very, very quick through Eau Rouge because he's just so brave. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. How out of shape he is, he just keeps his foot in. But ultimately the tires are only going to last a certain number of laps driving it like that. Yeah. I generally a little bit smoother. I mean, you can get pretty out of shape with them, but there is a very fine line in the 911. It's such a lovely balance. It's very easy to overstep that mark and be very sideways very quickly. That's also our car is set up. It's quite sharp. It's quite knife edgy like that. It's not the ideal setup for every driver. Some people would find it a bit too racy, basically. They'd prefer it a bit softer, a bit more forgiving. But myself and Andrew, who drive that, we're both pretty experienced in them and other cars that are pretty hairy, basically. Yeah. So we're, we can we can kind of collect it all up on most occasions, and it's okay. But no, they are great fun.
So the 2 Litre Cup is one of those series that I've seen, and I see you often at the Peter Auto events, and you're always racing generally with Historica. It looks like a very fun grid to be in, just like a ton of old Porsches. How do those cars compare to, let's say someone's driven an old road 911? How does that compare to, let's say, a 2 litre 65 race car?
Well, the Historica car and a lot of the ones I've driven are done to a lovely spec. So, they've got the full salt and pepper carpet sets in them, and, they've got the right dash, they've got all the video gauges. And I've also driven ones that are completely stripped out with, modern sort of race gauges in them. And so it depends which one you drive, I think. But in terms of the handling, they're obviously much stiffer than the road car would be. They'd be a bit uncomfy on the road. They've obviously got quite big anti-roll bars on them, and the torsion bars are stiff. The engines are tuned for sort of peak power on a race circuit, so they're a bit lumpy down low, and they get a bit choked up in the paddock, etc. So in terms of their drivability, they're still very drivable. But yeah, the road car, you definitely notice it, be certainly a bit sloppier and nowhere near as sharp. But they've definitely got that inherent 911 feel, the intake noise from the engine and the gearbox, obviously being a dog leg first in those cars. They're a lovely old thing to drive. And, I'd say, compared to a road car, they're obviously got more power. They're a bit lighter, not loads lighter, because with that minimum weight, you can still have full trim. You can still have 2 seats. Obviously, you don't have your rear seats anymore. And you've got a cage, which adds weight. So they're probably not that much lighter than a road car, but the gear ratios are all finely tuned to what you're doing, and the motors, fully race tuned motor effectively. So they're all tightly policed. The series has been really good at that. They've had engine sealing, I think, as of this year, but they've making sure everyone's been building engines with the correct valve sizes, and everyone's got a pattern exhaust this year, which will hopefully stop some of the issues we had last year where the exhaust regs changed and people were trying to make their own version of it. Now they've just said it's this part number, fit that exhaust, and then everyone's in the same boat, which is definitely the way to go. Otherwise, people, it's just a spending war trying to who can come up with the best exhaust.
Yeah, I remember hearing someone was moaning about that, and rightly so, that like a particular car had 5 different exhausts or something. Yeah, just developing. So what sort of, in terms of the grid, ignoring the drivers, what's the difference between the sort of slowest car and the fastest car? Or I guess you can't do that.
It depends, really. I mean, there's some cars that are sort of a bit worn out. The owners had them for 20 years or whatever, and they use it for tour auto, they use it for rally events. It's a softer car generally. They've not done a lot of testing. They are driver of an ability that just goes there to have a great time, and they're not that fussed about how they do. They just want to go to a lovely track, see their friends, and have a good result. And as a result, they might be driving around 10 or 15 seconds a lap slower around somewhere like Spa. That doesn't mean the car couldn't do the time the front running cars could do. It'd probably be a couple of seconds off because it's not the same level of prep. But they're all fairly similar at the end of the day, which is what makes the racing so good. 43 cars that we had in that first race at Spa, which was an incredible sight to see.
Has it stayed as popular? It seems to be.
Yeah,
very,
this
popular.
year, obviously, this year's a bit up in the air. People's other commitments are elsewhere, and some people obviously won't necessarily come and support the rounds this year because of difficulties with travelling internationally and concerns about quarantine and hotels, etc. But I think the grid, the initial signs, speaking to the organisers, was that the grid was going to be really good this year. We should have started off with Paul Ricard in April, and then Spa in May, and then Dijon a couple of weeks ago. So, those rounds have gone, but Paul Ricard's been rescheduled for July, and then we should have Monza in September, and then Estoril in October. So if it ends up being 3 rounds, that'll be great. That'll be the same as it was in the first year of the championship. It was 3 rounds. Yeah. That'll be enough, I think. If it was any less than that, it wouldn't make much of a series of it. But I think with 3, it'll be okay. And it's well promoted. And it is great.
If you could only go to one of the European tracks to race, which would it be?
Spa. Just it's never a difficult question, that for me. It's I've raced there so many times over the years. I can't even think of the number of laps I must have done around there. But it's just an amazing circuit. Great part of the country to be in. It's good little restaurants tucked away over there, and The beer's good over there as well. Good beer, good chips and mayo. They like all that. But so no, it's just a great track. Fantastic. One of the iconic circuits, and obviously it changed a lot since the early days, but the original circuit is still there and you can drive around it. And in fact, when you do the Fun Cup, the 25-hour in the VW Fun Cup, the sort of one make series.
Have you done that?
Yeah, many times actually. That's a great race as well. But when you do that race, the formation lap at the start is a full lap of the old circuit.
Okay.
So the whole grid of 160 of these quirky-looking VW Beetles, you go and do a full lap of the circuit, and then you come in at Stavelot, go through Blanchemont, and then you start the race.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's quite cool. But it is just such an incredible circuit.
So you've driven a bunch of classic cars, raced a bunch of historic stuff. What have been the most memorable, and sort of why?
T70, Lola T70 that I race is an awesome thing. 1969. It's a world sports car. It still runs occasionally. We don't get it out that often, but we do the FIA historic sports cars with it, which is a really competitive series. We've had a good success with it over the years, and that's an amazing thing to drive. It is very quick. It's like 2 minutes 28 around Spa, which on treaded historic tyres
that's quick.
Is really fast.
That's really quick.
It's 35 seconds a lap faster than the 2-litre car, for example. Than the Porsche. So it's an amazing thing. It's sort of 800 kilos, 500 horsepower. Rear tyres are 18 inches wide. I mean, it's very, very cool. So that's amazing. I've really enjoyed that. The Cobra that I raced, AC Cobra, that's a really famous car. I've raced that a lot over the years. Spa 6 Hour, we've done many times with that. Gent Drivers, which is now the Masters GT, raced it there, and then obviously lots of races at Goodwood with it over the years of mixed success. Not come away with the win yet, unfortunately, but we've certainly been up the front for many years. Had some great battles with that, and we hope to be back at the Rival soon with it, and try and finally get that win, because that's been on the to-do list for a long time.
Yeah, with something like the Cobra, which just from watching them, it seems like they have tons of grunt and then just try and make it around the corners and then get back on the gas again and just
it's just very, very basic. If you see a Cobra with the body off or the engine out, and it's just a ladder chassis, so it's two thick steel tubes next to each other with a transverse leaf spring front and rear, like you'd have on a kart, from the 18th century, and a Ford V8. And a lightweight aluminium body. That is it. They're so simple. So you don't have any of the the double coilover dampers you get on an E-Type or inboard discs or any of that tricks. You don't have any of that. So they are you want to try and, with the Cobra, you want to try and make the lap as many straight lines as possible, and then sort of try and deal with the rest when you get there. But no, it is hairy. I've had a lot of good races with it over the years, and ours is well developed in terms of, we've run it for so many years, and it's raced since day one. It ran at Goodwood in '64, so it's a famous car, and it has raced its whole life. So that's what's nice about driving that, and it is a very special thing. But yeah, as you say, it is a hairy thing to drive, and kind of very different to an E-Type or Ferraris from that era, which were a bit more sophisticated, I'd say, back then. But now that Ford engines have been developed over the years to produce more power and be a lot more reliable than they were in period, they're a quick thing. You can win a lot of things with a Cobra in historics.
Yeah, if someone's not driven an old car, let's say someone's only driven modern vehicles, full stop. How would you explain the difference between driving something like the Cobra to your normal hatchback? What sort of,
well, yeah.
What sort of things do you have to do differently?
It's obviously a huge variation, but it's just the whole experience. I mean, the power, you've got the relative lightness of it. The Cobra's down at 900 kilos, which is probably half a ton less than a hatchback nowadays. Yeah. And you've probably got 4 times the horsepower of a hatchback. So, I mean, the acceleration, is phenomenal. I drive things that are quicker than that. So of course, when I get in that's not the first thing that jumps out at me. But no, the experience is amazing. You've got the carburetors right in front of you, with just a thin bit of aluminium in the screen. So you've got all that noise right there. Transmission obviously runs right past you with just a bit of carpet over it. So it's, you get all that experience, and you're on, a cross-ply historic tyre, which is, it's as close to zero grip as you could have, without them being flat. There's so little grip. You just can't believe how little grip there is on those tires. And yeah, it's a real balancing art between, as you say, going too sideways and scrubbing the speed off. Yeah, they're just an awesome thing to drive. The brakes are actually pretty good, and because the car's not that heavy, it does stop quite well.
Yeah. But
just the whole experience of driving it is just a really exciting thing to drive. And there's never a moment in it where you sort of think, oh, I wish I was doing something else. It is incredibly exciting, and I think that's what they mustn't lose with these modern GT cars. With a lot of the cars now downsizing engine capacities and adding turbos, and you're losing all the noise. And the noise, as any F1 fan will notice over the last few years, when you lose the noise, you certainly lose a lot of the excitement instantly.
Yeah, so many of the new GT cars are all like turbo V8s that don't sound that good. They make like a noise, but they don't howl or anything.
Yeah, it's not a nice noise either. It's a very harsh noise. A V8 or a V6 with a turbo and then a side exhaust. You're hearing 3 cylinders out of one side. So, even when the new RSR now, which I actually thought was turboed, apparently it's not actually turboed. It's just the exhaust.
It sounds weird.
So it's 3 cylinders per side out of side pipes. So
okay,
it just sounds so weird.
So you don't get the full.
You're not getting that howling 6, And likewise, the new Aston, it's got the Merc-based engine with the twin turbos, and again, that's got the side pipe each side. So you're hearing a 4-cylinder turbo go past rather than the rumble of a V8, which is a shame. And then obviously the new Corvette again. I've not seen that yet. We were obviously all due to see that over here at Le Mans this year, but I think they've pulled it from this year's event. But again, that's now the mid-engine car with a V8.
I wonder how much that plays into people's choice of what car they choose to drive in, let's say, go GT racing with. Because, everyone probably has their favorite manufacturer. Like, if I was going to go GT racing, I'd want to be with Porsche. But they also happen to make great race cars. But, like, if you used the old Astons, the old Corvettes, always sounded amazing. New ones, not so much. We might be like, oh, I want to drive the Lambo because it sounds insane. Like, do you think that's a big factor in people choosing it, or?
It might be. It's probably more to do with their affinity with the brand. And, if they grew up saying, when I can do it, I want to race a Ferrari at Le Mans, that would be their decision, whether or not the Ferrari sounds good or not. That would still be their goal. But the noise, certainly I think a lot of GT racing is about how cool the cars are. And, it's why, things like the Z4 was, when we raced that, it was sometimes a bit of a tricky sell with sponsors, because at the end of the day, it was a BMW Z4 and they could sponsor a Lamborghini, or a Ferrari or a Porsche. And, it is a very different brand. But obviously there is a nice bit of motorsport heritage with BMW, which was nice. And, it was a great car. And it wasn't, when someone saw it and realized how amazing it looked and how good it sounded, suddenly the sort of stigma associated with the Z4 as, a hairdresser's car didn't really happen. When someone came and saw that with the V8 and how awesome it sounded, and that rear wing and those diffusers, and
it was really cool car.
It was really cool car.
Yeah. If someone wants to get into racing, because that's a stupid question. Everyone always says this, like, oh, what should I do if I want to get into racing? It's like, well, go and find a series and do it. But but like, if you were pointing someone in a direction for, let's say, some historic racing, would you point someone and they wanted to get into it, and they've, let's say, start off with a small budget, and then maybe in 10 years' time they've got a massive budget or whatever. But where would you point someone? What cars, what series, what sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked this a lot because I do quite a lot of driver coaching. So a lot of people that I start off with are just getting into the sport, and they, may have a certain budget at that stage, and they're sort of winding down. They might be, their 5 to 10 year goal might be that they're going to sell their business, and then they're going to buy a load of cars, and they've kind of got big plans to get into it. And, the thing to be a bit cautious of course, is if you want to do the big events and go to the great circuits, the cost to be there and the cost in terms of time and funds to be at those events is very similar, whether you're in a Cobra, a Ferrari, or an MGB. Your running costs for the car are a little different, but you've still got travel, fuel, tires, all that side of it. So you don't want to go down the sort of false economy route where you say, right, well, I'll start off with this car to end up at that car. But some of your fixed costs are as much. So I think it just depends what car they dream of racing. There'll be someone that loves touring car racing, so they should get a historic Mini or something like that. Where I believe the budgets are fairly sensible. Of course, there's so much development and so much tuning in those motors nowadays to get the cars really on a knife edge at the front. You've got to be a bit careful it doesn't end up being a spending war like a lot of those sort of touring car series become. Yeah. But certainly something, I'd happily recommend someone to go and get an MGB or a Lotus Elite or something small powered where you've got to learn how to drive first. You wouldn't want to jump in something with huge power and in a position where you could get yourself in trouble early on and have an accident. Because at the end of the day, those old cars aren't particularly safe. So you've got to factor that into it. And another something like the Caterham Academy again is a great thing to do because you get your first year's racing and your license test and all of that included as buying the car. So that's a good series to do. And I know a few people that have done that over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like a good one, that one. Your point about the running costs being very similar is, I think, it's something that a lot of people miss. Like I've raced a bunch of different cars in different things over different weekends, but the support costs have generally been very similar, pretty much.
Yeah, they will be in terms of travel, hotels, a day rate for the guys that are spannering the cars. That's all fairly similar. So at the end of the day, you've got to be a bit mindful of that. Obviously, a car with a DFE engine is obviously got very, very limited lifing and very expensive rebuild costs. So your costs per kilometre or cost per hour on a car like that are obviously a lot higher. But again, your other costs, as you say, your fixed costs for that event, your entries, travel, fuel, that sort of stuff's probably pretty similar, whether you're in a Mini or a Formula One car. So you've got to be mindful of that when making those decisions and choose something, which kind of, what you don't want to do is commit to doing something and then sort of run out of steam half through the year. Especially when you're learning, you want to try and have as much fun as you can and do the best events that you can do. And obviously endurance racing is good as well. Some of the historic endurance stuff, because you can obviously share the costs with other drivers, which is nice. And often the ownership as well. There's a lot of people that they share the ownership of a car together, and it helps when every invoice that comes through is divided in half.
Yeah, I can definitely feel for that one, having had a very big accident recently and it was split between 5 people rather than one. I was like, yeah.
Oh yeah, well that
I'm okay with that. So you do some coaching.
Yeah.
What's the sort of big hitters in terms of things that to help people with their driving that you see?
Yeah, well, I coach like nowadays. I don't actually do any in-car anymore when I'm sat next to the driver that I'm coaching. I do everything. Generally, the people I work with, most of them aren't complete novices. A lot of them have raced and they're spending a load of money on the car and they can't work out why they're not getting the results. And then they realize often later on that they ought to spend something sharpening themselves up, because the drive is what makes the big difference when it comes to lap time in these historic cars or in any car. And so I use like Video VBox or other data tools like that, and I do a demo lap in the car so they have a reference lap basically and get the data and the video and then coach them off that effectively. So you're not in the position where you're in the passenger seat next to them, which instantly adds 90 kilos to the weight of their car that they doesn't feel like it normally does, doesn't brake as well, doesn't accelerate as well. And you're not obviously trying to yell at them, with hand gestures and, the odd swear word, trying to stop them doing something silly. So, you can calmly have a chat with them over a cup of tea back in the garage and point out where they're going wrong and show them through the video. And it really, the results are staggering. Like, there's very few days, the first day when I'm with people that we don't knock 5 or 10 seconds off of someone's lap time, which is just mad when you think what they'd, the half a tenth they gain by changing the dampers, or, this half a second they might gain by a new set of tires. So, generally it's a lot about vision, technique. Vision is key, really. At the end of the day, the car goes where you're looking. So a lot of people don't get that right. But until you're out there and you have someone who can point this out to you, it's not always that easy to work that out.
Yeah, I found the reference lap. It's quite brutal at times, because you've gone out and you've gone as fast as you think you can go, and then they go out in exactly the same car on exactly the same day. So all your excuses are out the window. And they're probably on slightly worse tires. And they're like, okay, 10 seconds. Interesting. But no, it's definitely...
Well, it is interesting. I mean, this sort of technology has been around, well, maybe 15 years now, probably, maybe 20, but certainly probably 15 years, that sort of widespread use of sort of V-Box, and probably only the last 5 or 10 in historics. It was very unheard of to see it when I started out. And, now there's a lot of drivers that, they buy these historic cars, they pair up with a pro, not necessarily a young pro, some old guys that have been around for years, and they're now armed with the tools of V-Box and other data logging systems, and then they help bring them along with it, because it's so much easier to find time and get good results through using this sort of technology to assist you. And I think, you don't want to spoil the look of the car, by having sort of gadgets all over it. And, there are rules in the different series. You're not allowed live data acquisition and things like that, which is what you'd have in a modern GT car. And you've got pit-to-car telemetry at Le Mans. They're watching everything you're doing in a modern car. You're not allowed that in historics, which is good. I don't think you should be allowed that. You are trying to be driving cars that, marking the period that they were from. So I think that's good that they haven't allowed sort of to step into historic world too much. But as you say, the reference lap is a very useful thing. And the key is that people understand how to use that data and to go back out and make incremental steps. Because if you point out to somebody that, they're braking 96 meters too early, that's a huge distance. But when you're doing 150 miles an hour, 96 meters is probably a quarter of a second. So if you tell them to think, please brake 100 meters later, if they actually tried to do that, they'd probably brake 200 meters later and they'd be straight in the gravel.
Yeah.
So you've got to be a bit cautious with how you do that. Marco Attard, who I raced with in British GT in the Z4 in 2013, he was phenomenal with the data, very trusting. And if you just told him to do something, he'd go out instantly, and on the outlap, he'd do what you just told him to do. Just completely trusting in the data, which was really, really good. So, it meant we had phenomenal results that year. And at Zandvoort, for example, where neither of us had been, there's a section out the back of the circuit where there's a really fast right, it's blind over a brow on the sand dunes. And in the Z4, which had so much aero, that was flat. And there's a lot of drag. So if you lift at 150 miles an hour in a car like that, it's like putting the brakes on.
Yeah.
So his little lift he was having, which to sort of 70% throttle, was costing him a couple of seconds over that bridge. Yeah. So I just told him on the data it is flat, and he looked at the video and watched it a couple of times and was like, okay. And on the outlap, he does it, and he just finds that time straight away. Whereas there's other people who kind of aren't trusting of that sort of technology and don't believe it, even though you've shown them it is, and they'll pound around all day doing the same thing because they don't take that leap of faith, which is kind of needed, I guess, when you're shown what the car can do.
Yeah, I remember it was the first day I'd gone to Silverstone with my radical testing, my SR3, and I guess it must have been Cops. And the difference between the speed I was going around and who was it? Olly Hancock. He was like 20 miles an hour faster or something like, or maybe 20 kilometers an hour faster at the apex. And I remember looking at that and be like, yeah, so no, that's, I'm not just doing that. that seems absolutely bonkers. And then was just started like, I started learning these techniques for just chipping away at it. Don't just go out and go 40 miles an hour faster through a corner because someone said it, because actually maybe you can't. If your steering's not quite right and everything else is not quite right, you might fluff it and end up in a wall.
It's probably flat in an SR3, is it? Or almost. Or?
It depends on which way the wind's going, and it's basically flat in and then lift in the middle somewhere depending on conditions.
Yeah, no, that's mad. Yeah, they do take some. Must take some getting used to. I've driven an SR3 at Silverstone actually, but it was a few years ago. But I was blown away by instantly. You feel like it's doing everything you want. It's only when you're really on it that you start getting the understeer and the slower speed starts. And initially on your outlap, you're like, well, this just does anything I want it to do. You can't even believe there's anything wrong with it ever. But it's like any of these things. They feel so good. You jump in a GT3 car nowadays. The first few laps out, performance is so good and so easy. But it's only that last second that you really have to be on it.
Yeah. Do most cars, reasonably general question, are most cars similar when you get towards the limit if you drive in a similar way? Or have you driven some cars that are just they're just weird?
I mean, well set up race car, I haven't really had any front wheel drive experience, but a well set up race car generally has the same traits. If you go in too fast, it'll generally understeer. If you then lift immediately, having gone in too fast, you'll probably lose the rear.
Yeah.
So those sorts of, that's the sort of thing that not to do. Don't go up Eau Rouge with loads of lock on because the car's about to go light. Those basic things that you just see people get wrong so often. What you've kind of got that drilled into you as things not to do. But they do basically all handle fairly, similar traits, I suppose you'd say, albeit different speeds, different levels at which they break
different
away,
tires, whatever,
different angles they're happy sitting at. There's some cars that are quite soft, and you need to sort of turn in a bit early to get them to roll onto the outside tire and get them set up for the corner. Whereas a racing car, be it like a T70 or Lotus 15 or something that's actually built as a racing car rather than a hotted up road car, effectively, they're much sharper at the front end, much more similar to your Radical, albeit very different in the same way. No aero really.
Do you ever play on a sim?
Yeah, I actually have a setup which I got back in 2015, actually, prior to that first Le Mans I did with the Corvette, just to get clued up on the circuit again in a GT car. And it's pretty useful. My internet where I was so bad at the time that I don't actually use it for iRacing or rFactor or anything like that. I've got sort of a remote login so I can go on and just test, basically. But more recently I've been using using GT Sport quite a lot, which is good, just on a PlayStation, which most people have them, and you can get a pretty decent steering wheel and pedals for not a huge investment. And I've been using that quite a lot during lockdown, which has been good fun, actually. Yeah, racing against people I've raced against for real and friends, and doing a sort of an online, there's a sort of group of us that race twice a week in a sort of historic league, and we've got we race, we're running in the cars that we race. So we've done sort of an E-Type race at Goodwood, a GT40 race at Spa, that sort of stuff. So that's really good. And the tracks are so accurate now. Most of them are all laser scanned, so the level of realism is really, really good.
Yeah.
And the sort of the tire models is the thing that still isn't quite there. On GT Sport, the general balance of cars is pretty reasonable, but the grip levels, even if you choose a bad tire, are still a bit too high to reflect historic lap times. So like a Cobra or an E-Type round Goodwood is probably 5 seconds too fast on GT Sport compared with real life.
You can't really make it slower. You
could add some weight and take some power out of it, but I'm not that fast. We're all on the same thing.
Not that bothered.
It doesn't really matter. But they are useful. And of course, I tuned in at the weekend to some of the virtual 24-hour at Le Mans, which looked really interesting. It was well sort of broadcast, and a lot of teams put a lot of effort in and had their full engineering support from the real teams to help get them through the race. And it was interesting to watch, and it was cool to see Nick Tandy win it. So he's won the real 24-hour and the virtual with Porsche both times. So that was really cool.
I think it's cool seeing. I've watched a little bit of some of the races that have been recently, and for me, and I think a lot of people feel like this, like if there's names I've heard of, it adds a lot, because I know that this person, whether it's Verstappen or whatever, is fast in real life. And therefore you've got like a marker. I know they have to learn sim racing, and some of them do a lot more sim racing than the others, but it's like a marker for how quick the other people are. Your sim racers that no one's heard of, who are unbelievably fast. Like once you've got some real names thrown in the mix,
then you appreciate how good they are. Yeah,
you appreciate how good they are. How much do you think it translates to driving real cars? Let's say GT Sport. So I think a lot of people will have GT Sport. I'd say
certainly in the last few years, it's getting closer and closer. I saw something on YouTube earlier, which was 2 laps side by side. It was an rFactor 2, which has got a lot better than the early rFactors that I had to go on before, versus Le Mans RSR lap side by side. And, you have to sort of do a double take for the first 30 seconds of the video to work out which video is the real and which is the sim.
Yeah.
In terms of the sounds, the graphics, the things you're going past, the scenery, the campsites, and the way the car's responding to the inputs from the driver, they are getting closer. You still get, at the end of the day, you're not getting the full experience when you're driving the sim, even if you've got motion, which I don't like because it makes me sick, or even if you've got some of those things turned on, you're still basically relying only on your eyesight. Yeah. And you're not getting the motion and the feel that you have in a real car, which allows you to feel something before you see it. So in a real car, you can feel the slide and you're already correcting it before you see the front of the car move.
Yeah.
So the guys that are on sims and have only that one sense, which is, I guess, the sound and their eyes,
and
is phenomenally finely tuned, which is why often when you put them in real cars, they're so good, because, when they suddenly get the other senses, it's actually easy for them. And so that's, something that I think they're definitely getting a lot closer. And, a lot of the sim guys that have come through, I mean, like Jan Mardenborough, who was one of the first winners of, Luca Ordonez, they were sort of the first winners in the first couple of years of the Nissan Academy. He came and raced with us against us in British GT back in 2012, with Alex Buncombe, and straight away, they were challenging for race wins and fighting for the championship, and he'd come straight from a simulator. So, well, in fact, not even a simulator really. That was just GT Sport at home on his Gran Turismo at home on his PlayStation. So, without the fancy steering wheels and proper brake pedal setups that people have now got, there's people spending, well, certainly upwards of 30 or 40,000 pounds people could spend on these simulator rigs.
It's crazy,
which is mad. I mean, you can get something very decent for 4 or 5, but some of the figures that people are spending is mad. And of course, during lockdown, I think being in the simulator business has probably been a very good.
It must have been the amount of races or people that were going to go and do some expensive racing that have previously not bought a sim. It's like, well, okay, well, if I won't do a weekend of GT racing, I might as well get a sim.
Yeah, no, I think that certainly happened. So no, it's been interesting to see.
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting to see the development and how it's changed. And I've definitely noticed the difference of trying different kit. Like, I've tried a few different things. I haven't tried massively up the range, but even just like 5 years ago, the general consumer stuff 5 years ago or 10 years ago to the general consumer stuff now is so much better.
Yeah.
Like, and you just feel so much more in the wheel.
Yeah, no, that is good.
No, it's good fun.
But you still get, as I said, when you're on without that level of feel that you get from real life situation.
Oh, yeah.
I'll find myself in a GT car on a simulator spinning, coming out of a hairpin at 30 miles an hour. Yeah, of course, you're so annoyed with yourself because you would never do that.
Yeah.
And of course, you're blaming the sim and, upset. But you're just like, well, don't be ridiculous. I would not have spun the car at 30 miles an hour. I'd have felt it and I'd have steered into it. But it could just be gone, just like a switch. And you're facing the wrong way and you're trying to reset. And you're in the gravel and, that can be very, very frustrating.
Yeah, and you have to learn all these things. I was watching... it was something that the sim racers do that just no one does in a real car, is they like blip down the box like a madman. It's just like 6 to first, like obviously you can't do that in a normal road car.
No, well, I think that, I guess they haven't got to worry about, an engine or gearbox bill if it goes wrong. But I mean, there's some interesting things. I mean, especially like some of the online sort of time trial shootout functions on GT Sport, you'll see some of these lap, you'll go and do a decent lap somewhere and you'll be, 1800th in the world and you're 9 seconds off someone you've never heard of. And you think, how on earth are they doing that? And you can actually watch the laps. You can go and access the lap they've done and you can play it. And when you watch it, they are doing some incredibly interesting lines and just so much practice that they found, how quick can you go through there and how wide can you go without getting the track cut penalty and without glancing that barrier. And, the time you put into it to find these bits where you can pick up tenths, halves, and and even whole seconds through just laps and laps and laps and laps, which I haven't got time for.
It is very impressive, and I like how, like you said, you can watch these replays. So you may not be able to get yourself 10 seconds, and it's always a crazy amount faster, the fastest lap than like I've ever managed to get close to. But at least you can see. You can watch them do the lap and then you can try it and then you can have the ghost on. Whereas like if you're in real life and you're trying to learn a track, essentially you're just trying to get better knowledge of the track and how to drive the track most of the time and then get the best out of the car or whatever. Like that process in real life is so slow.
Yeah.
Versus doing it, if you can learn a bit how, to get your lines, tweak your lines a little bit, you can do that on a PlayStation. You can hit reset. And you can follow someone or whatever. It's definitely an interesting learning tool.
As I say, the use of video and data logging, and being able to produce that reference lap, that's where that's helped shortcut that time massively.
Yeah.
Someone will be, they'll do 5 years of racing in a certain class, getting frustrated, always saying, oh, that other bloke's doing this, he's doing that, he's got the wrong this, the wrong that, or my team aren't so good, or, what's happening. And at the end of the day, their car is fully capable of doing it, and they just need to be shown how, or if their car has got something wrong with it, with the setup, they might be driving around a problem for years. I've got in cars where you can't believe how they drive. There's an issue with brake bias, or there's a warp disc, or something that they just haven't picked up because haven't been driving since they were a teenager, and they don't know that there's a problem. And the mechanics obviously don't drive the cars, so they do their best, but they don't have that feedback because they're not behind the wheel. They'll fire it up in the workshop, and to them everything seems fine. Yeah. So that helps save a lot of time. For these guys that are getting into it and want some coaching, and it makes a huge difference to them. I've worked with a lot of drivers over the years who've gone on to have a lot of success, and it does make a big difference. Think of any professional sport where people don't have a coach. Yeah, there's so few. The F1 drivers have all got coaches still. You can always have a different opinion, or a different. You can always be sharper at something, can't you?
Yeah, and like you said, you don't know what you don't know. Like I know. When I'm driving a car on track, most of the time I'm thinking about just sort of not like just getting round, but you're focusing on various things, whether getting your line better in this corner or braking a bit later or whatever, all that sort of stuff. So when someone comes in and says, well, how does the right rear wheel feel? Do you think it needs a bit more toe out or whatever? You're like, I don't know. I'm not thinking about that. Whereas like put in someone like yourself, you can go round. You can do a very, very fast lap without having to think about it too much. And you're aware of all of these other things like, oh, the brake bias is a little bit too far forward, or all of that stuff. Whereas it just goes straight over my head most of the time.
Well, yeah, I think it's just the more you've driven stuff and the more experience you get, you have, I guess, a capacity to, require less of your concentration on the driving. Yeah. They always said, with someone like Schumacher, didn't they, that he didn't, he was only using sort of 10% of his efforts to drive the car. The other 90 was thinking about the strategy and when he was going to pit, and where he was going for dinner that night or whatever. He's the capacity that these drivers have. I mean, the F1 drivers nowadays, with all the controls and the systems they've got, mad. The GTE cars have a lot of buttons and a lot of functions on the wheel. You have to know what they all do, but touch wood, you don't have to use many of them. During your stint, you might adjust the fuel map, and you'll press the drink button. You'll use your radio, the headlight flasher. And then if you have a code 60, like a slow zone or something like you'd have at LeMans, where there's where they isolate certain areas of the lap and make basically a safe zone, like a miniature safety car, but only for a certain section of the lap. You'll have to go onto a different speed limiter because it's 70 clicks or 80 clicks, whatever it is in that zone, versus the pit lane, which is slower. So you've only got certain things you have to do, and then what all the other buttons do if there's a problem. You know what the other control buttons do, and you've got spare ignition systems, spare fuel pump systems, and you have to learn what all that does in the event that something goes wrong. You don't waste time asking your engineer on the radio what to do. Yeah. But generally speaking, you'll use 3 of the 30 buttons on the wheel. Yeah, you're not scrolling through screens whilst heavily loaded up through a corner, just adjusting the bias this way and the suspension. Yeah, I mean, they changed bias around something like Monaco. They changed brake bias, diff settings, fuel map, like the level of braking, the regen braking through the rear wheels, front wheel. I mean, it's incredible. So those drivers now have got, although, physically in terms of, the controls are all light, so to speak, but they've still got huge loads on them, massive, especially under braking, the grip the cars have got now with those wings and the tyres. They've got huge physical forces on themselves, plus the mental load of dealing with all those controls. But it is all they do. So they've got, that's the car they drive for that whole year, and they don't drive anything else nowadays. So they haven't got to learn more than one car. So When you were doing a lot of GT racing, did you do things like train your neck, or it was just you spent enough time in the car so it was okay? Yeah, we do a bit. I mean, you'd always feel the first test days, which if it was something like Blancpain, it would be the early test days. You'd probably do a day or 2 in the UK, and then you'd be at Paul Ricard for the balance of performance, which would normally be in March. Yeah, you'd be a bit stiff on the first day, but otherwise, you're in the car so often that actually, it's okay. And the control inputs are light. You've got power steering. The legs are the things that take the big hit, really, which is just the brake pressure. Yeah. And core, really, from the cornering. You've got to have a strong core, really. If that's weak, then you're your back will hurt, and then you'll be in agony after a stint. And you do in the endurance races, you are in these cars for a long time. Le Mans even more so in GTE, because there's only 3 drivers over 24 hours, whereas at Spa 24 hour, for example, there's 4 drivers in the car.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like a huge difference, but it is 6 hours of the driving that you have to share between the other 3. So, you're in the car for a while. A triple stint, at Le Mans is something that you do. You wouldn't normally do that in Blancpain because it's the 4 drivers. Yeah. You normally only do a double, which would be sort of just under 2 hours. Or maybe just over if the safety car, you can make the fuel go a bit longer.
That is a long time in a fast car.
At Le Mans, you'd be just under 3 hours in a GTE car, which even though you've got air conditioning, in that there's a cockpit regulation, the temperature of the cockpit can't get above 45 degrees, I think it is, which is pretty warm anyway.
It's pretty toasty.
But there's a sensor which links up to the ACO, and if your car exceeds that cockpit temperature, they send you a message on the race control screen, and the car has to be brought in for repairs. You have to fix the air conditioning system.
Okay.
Which is mad. It's good in that you don't get the problems you had in GT1 where you were getting 65 degrees cockpit temp, which was just boiling the drivers.
Which is, that's crazy.
You still sweat a decent amount in a 3 hour stint at 45 degrees. I mean, that's a pretty decent workout.
Yeah, I feel for the AM drivers in this situation. If you're a pro driver, invariably you're probably youngish and you should be quite fit because you are a pro driver. But if you're just an AM, I know a lot of them are quite good, but you probably just have you run your company most of the time and do a bit of racing a couple of times a year. You're not quite in the sharpest of. I mean,
I think that's where a lot of the attitude of the AM, the bronze graded driver, the gentleman driver in things like GT and Blancpain, that's what the attitude of that towards how seriously they take it has changed a lot in the last few years.
Okay.
There's a good series, I think it's called The Gentleman Driver, which was on, it was either on Amazon or Netflix.
Yes, that was really good.
Really, really good. And it looked into sort of some of the fastest gent driver in the world, in GTE and in America as well, I think in LMP. And again, that showed you how seriously they take it. Yeah, they are, in the office of a major company, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, except for when they go away racing on a Wednesday night or a Thursday. But, they take it very, very seriously. They've got personal trainers and they've got driver coaches and they've got physios at the track, and they take it seriously because at the end of the day, you'd be kicking yourself if you let the team down because you were tired late on in the stint and made a mistake. And, those things can happen. And as soon as you get fatigued, then you're more likely to make a mistake.
Yeah. And if you're in a LMP2 car and you're spending whatever $1 million it is a weekend or something, you don't want to have a crash. That's going to suck big time. Physically.
And I think not just from a personal point of view for those drivers, they very much like the team atmosphere of it. They'd be working with at least 2 other drivers who the whole weekend means a lot to them as well, and the whole team and everything around it. And if you make a mistake and it lets everyone down, they'd feel equally bad about it. So
yeah, for sure.
I think that's become a lot. I think the role of that gent driver in that type of racing, not just for the funding they bring, those cars would not be on the grid without them. And you sometimes get it where I think a few years ago, some of the pro drivers in an LMP car were sort of being quite dismissive of the gent drivers, through accidents that happen in traffic and tripping over them effectively. At the end of the day, they've got to realise that if those guys weren't there buying their RSRs to race in the GT class, you wouldn't be a pro in the 919 or the 918 hybrid, because Porsche wouldn't be at Le Mans without the sale of those cars. So they got quite a strict, shout down, I think, from the powers that be over that attitude they had, because at the end of the day, going back to the start of endurance racing, it's been gentlemen drivers that have bought cars and gone and raced them. Yeah. And the sport's got more and more professional. But at the end of the day, without, the 12 or 14 GT AM cars on the grid at Le Mans every year, there wouldn't be a pro factory lineup, because the cars wouldn't be there, because there'd be no need to develop them because they're not going to sell any. So, that role of those drivers is I think somewhat underappreciated sometimes, because without them, that wouldn't be happening.
Yeah. And all the pro drivers that get to drive because there's an AM that's paying for it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, all of the coaching I do in historics and modern that I've done has been because I've either been driving alongside the AM or helping them because they're going to be driving their cars with others, throughout the season. So, I've worked with some really good drivers over the years and brought them up to a level, and they've had great results. It's actually very rewarding, I don't have children yet, but it's the sort of thing that you actually get, a real sense of pride when someone that you've worked with does well. And I guess that's the sort of thing you'd get if your kid did well at football or, won a swimming race or whatever. So, that's something that I've enjoyed a lot. You get a lot of it's not just driving when you're driving yourself, the result you get working with another driver is a very rewarding feeling as well.
You always sort of wonder that when you're younger, you see older people coaching or, and they get a lot of enjoyment out of the people, like you said, they've coached doing well. And when you're younger, like, yeah, but don't you just wish you were doing it? Whereas you start to see these things. I've had a few things that, where you teach someone how to do something, they get better at it. And then you're like, oh yeah, like they're doing good.
Yeah.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah. I mean, it's I'm fortunate in that, I'm, not by sort of F1 or single seater standards, I'm no spring chicken by those sorts of, measures, but, I'm young in the historic world. I'm still one of the young quick guys out there. And, I've managed to meet some great people over the years, and, I've driven cars at all sorts of eras and again, both types of spectrum. It's been great racing in modern GT and great racing in historics, and being able to sort of dovetail the two sort of parallel careers almost has been really, really cool. You have a lot more respect for the cars you're driving and also the history of the sport as well, having sort of grown up, having driven cars that had success at Le Mans back in the day, and then to race its kind of replacement at Le Mans nowadays is very cool.
Yeah, very cool. Right, well, I normally wrap these up with 5 questions. You ready?
Okay, fire away.
Do you have a most memorable driving trip or journey?
Well, that's a tricky one. So that'd be on the road?
It can be either.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've done some great trips across Europe over the years. I try and tie in a trip back from a foreign race, with a nice driving trip. I think a great trip actually was probably 2 or 3 years ago in Portugal with a friend. We took a couple of cars up through like the Douro region, through all the vineyards, and some of the roads down there in Portugal are so underrated. No one's on them, which is a good thing. So we don't want to publicize it too much, otherwise they'll get too busy. But that was great. Yeah, a friend was in a 355 and I was in a GT3 RS, and on those roads, they were phenomenal, and no one on them, and brand new tarmac, which nice. I think is hopefully still in that condition. But that was a great trip. So I think that's probably one of my more memorable trips in recent years. Although as a kid growing up, we used to go across Europe. I remember I've got a brother and a sister, and we went to Switzerland in like the back of an old Bentley in the back seat, with flying goggles and helmets and stuff. And you sort of remember that because, it was cold and windy and we got rained on, and, Dad refused to put the roof up. You sort of remember those sorts of trips, growing up. But a lot of my memories are about racing, because the experience you get and the buzz you get from racing kind of dwarfs any road-based trip you could have. So I've got much more memories sort of on track than I have on the road, I suppose.
Most notable racing moment.
Probably it's very easy to say Le Mans because it's kind of fresh in my mind, because it wasn't that long ago. But probably Spa, 24 hours in 2014 and 2015 with the Kyrgios Z4 that we sort of ran the whole program. Barwell Motorsport ran the car for us, and myself, Joe Twyman, Andrew Smith, and Alistair McCaig, as a group, we put the whole program together and brought all the sponsorship together and got all the backers. And it was an incredible program we did from 2012 to 2011, actually, to 2015. And during that period, we had some really, really good success. We had a British GT Teams Championship, British GT Drivers Championship. We had third in Blancpain Endurance, which is a very, very competitive series. And in 2014 and 15, we had back-to-back Spa 24-hour podiums.
Nice. In
the top 7 overall, which was amazing. In 2014, it was myself, Alistair, Andrew, and Alexander Sims, who's really quick BMW factory driver. He now drives for them in Formula E. We were 7th overall and 2nd in Pro-Am. Fantastic result. We were in front of the Audi crew that won Le Mans that year. It was amazing. Yeah, that's cool. So that's probably one of my best memories, I'd say, because for GT cars, the Spa 24 Hours is the best race because it's a whole grid of GT3 cars. 80 of them around that track. There's no more sun straight. There's no time to have a rest. It's very, very intense. And there's 4 of you driving the car. But that's probably one of our greatest achievements as well, because we were so involved with putting that program together. And without all the work we'd all put in to make that program happen, we wouldn't have done it. So that's probably one of my best racing memories. I think, well, that's 2015 trophy actually. That's nice. That's for third in Pro-Am in 15 at the same race. So to do that result again the following year was
awesome.
Amazing.
That's cool. Right, next question. 5-car garage, unlimited value. You can have race cars and road cars.
Yeah, that is a tricky one, isn't it? As long as there's not a daily in there.
There is. It's got to fit into your life, so you've got to drive around in something.
Yeah. Well, I suppose if we mix some race cars into it, I suppose like the Cobra, so eligible, so many things it can do, so historied, that'd be something I would always like to try and hang on to. So I'd say that probably have to go in a 5-car garage.
Yeah.
2-litre Porsche, because there's so much you can do with them. They're so amazing. It's a pre-66 short wheelbase 911 because of all the things you can do with it, and you can drive it on the road.
Yeah.
They are an awesome thing. McLaren F1, just because I've never driven one. I've watched them.
GTR?
I've seen the GTR. Yeah, GTR, I think. Having seen them race at Le Mans and how well they did in 95, I think that would have to be in the lineup. Otherwise, 355s. I love Ferrari 355. They're just a really cool car. And I think nowadays with all these cars getting too fast, I think it's nice to have something that you can make a great noise and you can actually drive it to a certain level of its full capacity without being too silly. They're a great thing.
There's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah.
Like, modern,
just too fast.
Super modern stuff it's an awesome thing to be that fast, but you just can't use it.
Yeah, you can't use it on the road. I mean, I guess nowadays where a lot of these people are going with this sort of hypercar ownership is, I guess, hopefully some of them, hopefully they're not all just in Knightsbridge. Hopefully some of them are going out and actually being used properly, on tracks, which is where you're getting in this McLaren program and, this Ferrari Clienti thing. I think hopefully a lot of people are actually using their cars properly in that way with a pro next to them and properly using these cars because, you can't use 700, 800, 900 horsepower on the road. I mean, it's just silly.
No. I think if I had unlimited funds, I used to sort of look at them and go, that looks a bit crap. But like the Ferrari programs, like an FXXK or something like that, I would, or Aston Martin Valkyrie, but the race car version, I would totally have one of them and just like run it at the weekend if I had unlimited funds, because it's like a naturally aspirated V12. 900 horsepower, tons of downforce, slicks. It's probably quite good fun to drive.
Yeah, no, that's pretty appealing. The thing about that though, the thing you've got to, the only reason you'd be disappointed when you did something like that is if, you go and spend whatever you spend on that type of car, and someone turns up in an 8-year-old GT3 car on a set of slicks and it does the same lap time. Yeah. So
and then someone turns up in a Radical.
Yeah, it goes quicker than
like
that.
a tenth of the price. It's still faster.
Yeah. So there's a lot to be said for that sort of another option for somebody looking to do that sort of to drive a cool car around a track for track use only.
GT.
You can buy a Z4 for example. You could buy a GT3 Z4 for probably 130, 140 grand currently, and they're phenomenally fast. They're sub 2 minutes 20 around Spa, 2 minutes around the Grand Prix Circus at Silverstone, potentially a lot of value for the lap time you can do in them.
Yeah.
So there we go. Z4 GT3 car. That's got to be one of them as well.
Yeah.
Because of my memories
one more slot.
with that car. So that'll either be 4 or 5. Slot. I didn't do a road car yet. I didn't do a daily.
A road car. You need a daily. You've got a 911. Actually, quite a few of these are roadable.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe the GTR, that'd be a F1 GTR as a daily would probably be a bit tricky climbing across into that central seat. But if I did do 5 cars, then I think we did. Had the GTR, the 911, Cobra, 355, and the Z4. There we go. 5.
There you go. 5. Done. Right. If you could only drive one car for the rest of your life, what would it be?
It doesn't have to be from those 5.
No. And you're allowed like a £500 thing on the side to take stuff to the tip or whatever.
I mean, it would be some type of 911. Mm-hmm. Difficult to pinpoint it, but if it was going to, it'd probably be something like a 70s RS of some sort, an RS or an RSR, something that you could go and race if you wanted to, but is equally at home on the road. The 65 911 again could be that one of those options, but if we're talking about the ultimate, you probably want something with a bit more power than that. Maybe something that'd be a bit quicker on track. So maybe like a 74 RS or something would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's quite a good option, because it does that thing that it's in that era where you can have a road car that is a road car, but it's also a race car.
Yeah,
and you can do both.
You can do take that car for example. You could use it on the road. You could go and do Tour Auto with it. You could go and use it at Classic Le Mans. You could race it in Masters. There's just so much you could do with it.
Yeah.
Again, you can do that. Same with the 65 car. You could do the same, but you're obviously lapping a lump quicker there's a lot more technology in a mid 70s car than there is in the mid 60s. So
yeah,
and a very, very cool thing. And they look awesome. Wide bodywork, wing on the back. Very cool.
Yeah, very cool. What's the most undervalued car at the moment, do you think?
Well, definitely not 65 911s because they're expensive now. But when they were 50 grand, they definitely were undervalued given what you could do.
When were they 50 grand? How long ago?
A while ago now, but maybe 7-8 years ago.
Okay,
so not that long ago.
That long ago,
yeah. That would be like a road car for that sort of money. And then if you wanted to race it, you kind of you could choose how much you want to spend on it, basically. But undervalued cars, difficult to say, really. Are we talking race cars or road cars or anything?
Your pick.
Well, I certainly think those 2010, 2015 GT3 cars are still pretty cheap, given what you can do with them. I mean, a lot of the series don't allow GT3 cars yet, which is probably a good thing because of how quick they are, relatively to the kit they could be racing against. If you just bought a Le Mans winning 458 and a bloke turns up in a 2-year-old GT3 car and, annihilates you and you've paid £1 million because your car won Le Mans or something, that would probably be, so I think they're probably undervalued. But then again, that's always been the way. When a car's finished its racing life, they were worthless. The next model came out and then you couldn't give them away. GTOs in the 60s, when the LM came out, the GTOs, you couldn't give them away. People would crush them rather than ship them back from America because they didn't want to pay the freight.
It's mad.
So we're in a different world now, aren't we?
Yeah, totally. You'd feel bad if you'd crushed a GTO.
Yeah, I think you would, yeah.
Okay, last question. Most interesting car to you right now? What are you Googling? What are you looking up?
It's an interesting one, that. I'm quite a Porsche fan. I do like Porsches. I'd be interested to have a go in the Taycan. I've not...
Oh, yeah.
I've driven some electric cars on the road. I haven't driven a Porsche electric car on the road, so I'd be interested to see their take on it. I think, there's still... The world isn't quite ready for them yet, I don't think. Definitely not in terms of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
If all you do is local journeys, and your daily mileage is, say, less than 200 miles, and you can charge at home because you've got access to a power point or a driveway, you can put a fast charger, then I think, okay, they work, they make sense now. But as a replacement to the combustion engine for other people, it just doesn't really work yet. So I'll be interested to see how, what happens over the next 5-10 years in terms of an option for somebody. At the moment, if you go to an airport because you think it's great, I'll charge my i3 up. When I come back from my trip, it'll still be in the charging bay and it'll be fully charged. If you get to the airport and that one charging bay is in use, that whole plan's out the window, and you fly back in at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, you can't get home. Yeah. So that isn't really acceptable yet.
You could leave a little solar charger in your windscreen.
Well, you could, if you're parked outside.
Yeah.
But I think that Taycan is quite an interesting thing. I'd like to try it, but my passion really is with the older cars, I'd say, because they give you an experience that means you get a load of enjoyment out of them without having to go too fast.
Yeah.
As we were saying, touching on these modern cars, they are phenomenal, but they're so fast and they're just too fast for the road. So you don't get the enjoyment that you should get. You squeeze the throttle in these modern 600 plus horsepower supercars, pull a couple of gears, and you're going far too quickly already. So I think a car that balances, so I think sort of Cayman level of performance is kind of all you need for the road, really. I think the gearing's a bit long on them, apparently, but I need to.
Yeah, the modern ones, it's annoyingly long, but you can adjust that. But yeah, I agree. Like, especially modern tires. Modern tires on a modern supercar that's got big fat rims on it. Like, you've just got endless amounts of grip.
Yeah, too much grip.
So you've got to be taking a lot of liberties to sort of feel it moving.
Yeah, you've got to be in the wet, and you don't want to experience those sorts of cars on a road moving in the wet. So you've got to be on track. And even if you're on track, do you want to be, massively out of shape and in a very expensive supercar on a circuit? Probably
Scratch
not.
all your carbon in the gravel.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, thanks very much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I hope people learn a few things about old cars and,
old cars
what it's like in the racing world. But it's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah, it's been good to chat. Sweet.